Commander HFY had been assigned to observation post K-17 for 6 standard months, and in those 6 months, nothing had changed. That was the assignment. Nothing changing meant everything was working exactly as intended. The sector was quiet, predictable, stable in the way that long-settled regions of the galaxy often became after enough time had passed without incident. Trade lanes moved along their mapped routes. Patrol logs came in on schedule. Sensor sweeps returned clean. The kind of clean that required no follow-up, no second glance, no thought beyond recording the result and moving on. It was, by all professional definitions, a perfect posting, and it was unbearably dull. The observation station itself orbited a dim red star at the far edge of a minor diplomatic boundary, positioned just far enough from any meaningful activity that its presence was more symbolic than necessary. It existed because protocol required it, because long ago someone had decided that this region, this quiet, uneventful stretch of space, deserved to be watched. So it was watched. Every 40 minutes, the station ran a full-spectrum scan across the boundary zone. Every 6 hours, a condensed report was transmitted to the nearest relay hub. Every 12 hours, HFY reviewed the logs, signed off on them, and added his name to another entry confirming that nothing had happened. Nothing had happened yesterday. Nothing had happened last week. Nothing had happened for years before he had even arrived. He leaned back slightly in his command chair, eyes drifting across the primary display. The stars beyond the viewport were steady and unchanging, fixed points in a pattern he had memorized without intending to. There was a comfort in that kind of repetition, a quiet assurance that the universe, at least in this small corner of it, was behaving as expected. His sensor officer, Lyra, sat 2 stations down, running the routine sweep with practiced precision. She was young, recently assigned, still carrying the faint edge of curiosity that most officers lost after their first few rotations in places like this. "Sweep complete," she said, her voice calm. "No anomalies detected." HFY nodded without looking at her. "Log it." "I already did." Of course she had. There was nothing else to do. He reached for the next report in the queue, scanning through maintenance diagnostics that required little more than a glance to confirm. Power systems stable. Shield arrays nominal. Communication relays functioning within expected parameters. Everything was fine. Everything was always fine. That was the problem. The Dominion had classified this entire region as low priority decades ago. The only notable feature within several light years was a single yellow star system cataloged, surveyed, and filed under developmental observation status. The species inhabiting its third planet had been deemed non-threatening at the time of contact, primitive by interstellar standards, limited to early-stage technology, confined entirely to their own system. They had been noted, categorized, and left alone. A standard procedure. The report had been clear. Carbon-based life forms, moderately aggressive within their own species, demonstrated early industrial capability, possessed rudimentary spaceflight technology, insufficient for interstellar travel, communication signals detected, fragmented transmissions of sound and image, lacking coherent structure from an external analytical perspective, estimated threat level, negligible, recommended monitoring interval, 150 years. HFY had read that report once, out of mild curiosity. It had not seemed important. No one on the station thought about that system anymore. It was simply part of the background. Another entry in a database filled with worlds that might, eventually, become something worth noticing. Eventually, not now. Now, it was just another quiet star in a quiet sector. He exhaled slowly, closing the report and setting it aside. "Next sweep in 30 minutes, he said. Lyra gave a small nod. "Yes, Commander." Silence settled back over the bridge. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that came from routine, from familiarity, from knowing that nothing unexpected was going to interrupt the rhythm of the shift. The soft hum of the station's systems filled the space, steady and constant, like a heartbeat that had never once skipped. HFY had come to rely on that sound. Out here, far from the crowded systems and political centers of the Dominion, stability was everything. Predictability was safety. The absence of change was not just normal, it was desirable. Change meant problems. Problems meant escalation. And escalation, in any form, was something the Dominion preferred to avoid whenever possible. He had built an entire career on that principle, 19 years in service, and he had never once been present for a major incident. No conflicts, no emergency engagements, no situations that required anything beyond adherence to protocol and a steady hand. It was, by some measures, an unremarkable record. By others, it was exactly what the Dominion valued most: consistency, control, the ability to maintain order without disruption. He glanced once more at the viewport, at the distant yellow star barely visible among the others. It looked no different from any other star at this distance. No brighter, no more significant, just another point of light. Whatever existed there, whatever those early reports had described, it was contained, limited, years, perhaps decades, away from becoming relevant. There was no urgency, no reason to reconsider the assessment, no reason to look closer. "Commander," Lyra said after a moment, her tone casual, almost conversational, "do you ever think about them?" He shifted his gaze slightly. "About who?" "The species in that system." She gestured faintly toward the display. "The ones from the old survey report." HFY considered the question for a moment, then shook his head. "No, not even a little." "They were evaluated," he said simply. "Their capabilities were documented. Their development timeline was projected. There's nothing to think about." Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying the distant starfield. "Still, it's strange, isn't it?" "What is?" "That we saw them once," she said, "looked at their world, decided what they were, and then just left. That's standard procedure." "I know," she said. "It just feels incomplete." HFY allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. "You'll get used to it." She didn't respond immediately. The next sweep timer ticked down silently in the corner of the display. Outside, the stars remained exactly where they had always been. Nothing moved, nothing changed, and for one more moment, just one more, the universe held perfectly still. The next sweep began exactly on schedule. Lyra initiated it without needing to be told, her hands moving across the console with the same practiced rhythm she had developed over the past few months. The system responded instantly, extending its invisible reach across the boundary zone, mapping space in layers of data that would resolve, as they always did, into nothing worth noting. HFY did not look up immediately. He had already seen the result in his mind. Clean, empty, unchanged. That was how it always ended. "Running full spectrum," Lyra said, more out of habit than necessity. HFY gave a quiet acknowledgement, his attention still on the maintenance log scrolling across his display. There was a minor fluctuation in one of the auxiliary relays, well within acceptable limits, but enough to warrant a notation. He marked it, filed it, and moved on. Behind him, the sweep continued. 30 seconds. 40. 50. It should have completed by then. HFY frowned slightly, not at the delay itself, but at the fact that he had noticed it. The system was precise, predictable. It did not run long, without reason. He glanced toward Lyra's station. She was staring at her display, not working, not speaking, just staring. "Report," he said. She didn't answer right away. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Lyra was efficient, responsive. Even when nothing was happening, she maintained a level of professionalism that bordered on automatic. Delays in communication were not part of her pattern. Lyra. She stopped, her voice catching in a way he had never heard before. I'm verifying something. Havok stood. The chair slid back behind him with a soft sound that seemed louder than it should have been in the quiet of the bridge. He crossed the distance between them in a few measured steps, his attention shifting fully now, leaving the routine behind. What are you verifying? He asked. The return data, she said carefully. It's inconsistent. In what way? She hesitated, then adjusted the display so he could see it. At first glance, it looked normal. The familiar grid of the boundary zone. The standard overlay of mass readings, energy signatures, spatial distortions, all within expected ranges. Except for one section. Havok leaned slightly closer. There was a distortion in the data, not a spike, not an anomaly flagged by the system. Something subtler, a region where the readings didn't align the way they should have, where the system seemed to be attempting to reconcile conflicting inputs and failing. What is that? He said. I don't know, Lyra replied. The system keeps trying to normalize it, but it can't resolve the values into a stable model. Run diagnostics. I already did. Run them again. She didn't argue. Her hands moved quickly, initiating a full diagnostic cycle on the sensor array. The system responded immediately, checking calibration, alignment, signal integrity. Everything came back green. Havok watched the results populate. No errors, no faults, no explanation. Could be interference, he said, though the words felt thin even as he spoke them. There's no source, Lyra said. No radiation spike, no stellar activity, nothing in the region that should be causing interference. He looked back at the distortion. It hadn't moved. It hadn't changed. It was simply there. How long? He asked. I don't know, she said. The sweep only picked it up because it crossed the boundary threshold during the scan. It wasn't there on the previous cycle. So it appeared in the last 40 minutes. Yes. Havok's gaze hardened slightly. Space did not simply produce inconsistencies. Not without cause. Expand the scan, he said. Higher resolution. Narrow focus on that region. Lyra nodded, adjusting the parameters. The system recalibrated, concentrating its sensors on the affected area, increasing detail, refining the data. The distortion became clearer and less understandable. The mass readings fluctuated, not randomly, but in a pattern the system couldn't interpret. The energy signature was wrong, not absent, not excessive, just misaligned with any known profile. What am I looking at? Havok said quietly. Lyra swallowed. It looks like displacement. Displacement? Yes, like something is occupying that space, but the system can't properly map it. That's not possible. I know. He straightened slightly, his mind working through possibilities. Sensor ghost, data corruption, a transient anomaly caused by some unknown interaction of local variables. All of them had explanations. All of them could be resolved. This would be the same. It had to be. Pull historical data, he said. Last 10 sweeps. Lyra complied, bringing up the previous scans. They played back in sequence, each one clean, empty, consistent. Until the current one. The distortion appeared suddenly. No gradual formation. No warning. Just there. Havok felt something shift in the back of his mind. Not fear. Not yet. Just a quiet recognition that this was not following the patterns he understood. Commander, Lyra said softly. He didn't respond immediately. He was looking at the numbers now, really looking at them. The mass estimate. The system kept recalculating it, adjusting, attempting to settle on a value. It couldn't. The numbers kept resolving into something too large, then snapping back as the system rejected the result. What's the upper threshold? He asked. For automatic normalization? Yes, 200,000 metric units. And what is it reading now? Lyra hesitated. Then she expanded the raw data output, bypassing the system's attempt to filter it. The number appeared. HFY stared at it. Then he read it again. "That's wrong," he said. "I know. Run the calculation manually." She did. The result was the same. HFY exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, his voice steady again, controlled. "Pull up visual." Lyra didn't move right away. "Lyra, I don't think visual is going to help," she said. "Do it anyway." She nodded, switching the display. The main screen shifted from data overlay to direct visual feed. For a moment, everything looked exactly as it always did. A field of stars. Distant, steady, unchanged. Then HFY saw it. Or rather, he saw what wasn't there. A section of the star field was missing. Not dark, not obscured. Just gone, as if something had been placed between the station and the stars beyond, large enough to erase them from existence, but without any visible surface to define its shape. HFY felt the silence on the bridge deepen. The hum of the station seemed quieter now, or perhaps he was just listening more closely. "What is that?" he asked. Lyra didn't answer, because there was no answer to give. The thing in the distance did not move. It did not emit light. It did not transmit. It did not do anything at all. It simply existed, at the edge of the boundary, where, until 40 minutes ago, nothing had ever been. HFY did not speak for several seconds, not because he had nothing to say, but because whatever this was did not fit into any category his mind could assign it to. The display remained fixed on the same section of space, the same absence. The same impossible gap, where stars should have been. "Magnify," he said quietly. Lyra adjusted the visual feed. The image sharpened, then sharpened again. The system pushed its resolution limits, enhancing contrast, filtering noise, attempting to define the edges of what they were seeing. It didn't help. The shape became clearer, but not more understandable. It wasn't a void. It was an empty space. It was something occupying that space so completely that the stars behind it simply ceased to exist. No light passed through it. No reflection came off it. It didn't behave like any known material. It didn't behave like anything. It just blocked reality. Lyra leaned slightly forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not natural." "No," HFY said. "It isn't." He stepped closer to the main display, studying the edges of the distortion. There was a boundary, subtle, not a clean line, not a defined surface, but a transition where the starfield ended and the absence began. A shape, a massive, silent shape, suspended in space. "Adjust spectral filters," he said. "Cycle through all bands." Lyra complied. "Infrared, nothing. Ultraviolet, nothing. Gravitational lensing overlay." HFY's eyes narrowed. There. A faint distortion. Not strong. Not chaotic. Controlled. Precise. The kind of distortion that suggested mass. A lot of mass. "What are we seeing?" Lyra asked. HFY didn't answer immediately, because now his mind was starting to put the pieces together. Slowly, reluctantly. "Overlay mass data with visual," he said. The system complied, merging the two feeds. The numbers aligned with the absence. Every fluctuation, every failed normalization, all of it centered on that same region. The same shape, the same object. HFY felt a cold clarity settle in. "That's not a distortion," he said. Lyra looked at him. "Then what is it?" He didn't look away from the screen. "It's something the system doesn't know how to see." The words hung in the air. Lyra swallowed. "You mean?" "Yes." He zoomed the image further, focusing on the edge of the shape. There. For just a fraction of a second, something caught the light. Not a reflection. Not exactly. More like a surface interacting with light in a way that wasn't meant to be seen from this angle. A faint shift. A subtle change in brightness. Enough to confirm what his instincts were already telling him. "There's something there," Lyra said. "Yes." What kind of object blocks light like that? Havek exhaled slowly. A very large one. The bridge fell silent again. The kind of silence that wasn't routine anymore. Not comfortable. Not familiar. The kind that comes when something fundamental has shifted and no one has yet figured out what it means. Track it, Havek said. Relative position. Movement vector. Lyra's hands moved quickly. A moment later, she frowned. It's not moving. Everything moves. I know, she said, but relative to local reference points, it's holding position. Havek stared at the display. Holding position. At the boundary. Not drifting. Not passing through. Just there. How long has it been there? He asked. I don't know, Lyra said. It wasn't in the previous sweep. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. She hesitated. You think it just wasn't visible? I think, Havek said carefully, that whatever this is, it doesn't behave the way we expect things to behave. He studied the shape again, the way it sat in space, the way it didn't move, the way it didn't announce itself. It didn't feel like an arrival. That was the part his mind kept returning to. Arrivals had signatures, energy spikes, transition distortions, something. This felt different, like something that had already been there, and had simply become noticeable. Commander, Lyra said quietly. Yes, if that's an object. He knew what she was going to ask. He didn't let her finish. Run the size estimate, he said. She pulled up the calculation. The system hesitated, then produced a range. Havek looked at it. Then he looked again. The numbers didn't feel real, not because they were inaccurate, but because they implied something that shouldn't exist. That can't be right, Lyra said. No, Havek agreed. It's too large. Yes. She turned to him slowly. Then what are we looking at? Havek didn't answer immediately, because for the first time since the anomaly appeared, he wasn't trying to explain it away. He wasn't looking for a malfunction. He wasn't assuming the system was wrong. He was assuming the system was telling the truth. He looked back at the screen, at the shape cutting a hole in the stars, at the silent, unmoving presence sitting exactly at the edge of their monitored space. And for the first time, the thought formed clearly, not a possibility, not a theory, a conclusion. We're not looking at empty space, he said. Lyra's voice was barely audible. Then what are we looking at? Havek's eyes didn't leave the display. Something, he said slowly, that chose to be seen. Havek did not sit back down. He remained standing in front of the display, as if moving away from it might somehow change what he was seeing. It didn't. The shape remained exactly where it had been. Silent, unmoving, impossible. Run the full mass calculation, he said. Lyra hesitated. The system already. Raw values, he interrupted. No normalization. No filtering. She nodded quickly and adjusted the parameters, stripping away every layer of automated correction the system used to keep readings within expected ranges. The display shifted. Numbers began to populate. Large ones, then larger. Then, the system paused. Not because it couldn't calculate, but because it was trying to reconcile what it was seeing with what it believed was possible. Override, Havek said. Lyra did. The number finalized. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Havek read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, because the first two times his mind had rejected it outright. That's incorrect, he said. I ran it twice, Lyra replied. It's consistent. Run it again. She did. The number did not change. Havek felt something shift in his chest. Not panic, not yet, but the beginning of something colder, more precise. How far inside the boundary? He asked. Approximately 400,000 kilometers. That close? Yes. He stared at the number again, then back at the shape, then back at the number. His mind began doing what it had always done, breaking the impossible into smaller pieces, testing each one, trying to find the flaw. Mass, distance, visual obstruction, Gravitational distortion. Each piece, on its own, could be explained. Together, they formed something that couldn't be ignored. That mass, he said slowly, at that distance, should be generating measurable gravitational effects. It is, Lyra said quietly. The system just wasn't prioritizing it because it couldn't classify the source. Show me. She brought up the gravitational overlay. It appeared as a subtle warping of the surrounding space. Not chaotic, not unstable, controlled, contained, like something that knew exactly how much force it was exerting. And no more. HFY's jaw tightened slightly. That's deliberate, he said. Lyra looked at him. What is? The distribution, he said. It's not random. It's not a natural mass settling into equilibrium. It's managed. She stared at the display again. You're saying it's controlled? Yes. By something. The thought hung unspoken between them. HFY turned back to the visual feed. Enhance edge definition, he said. The system complied. The boundary of the shape sharpened slightly, just enough to suggest structure. Not smooth, not uniform. There were variations along the surface, subtle changes in density, slight irregularities that hinted at something constructed rather than formed, something built. Lyra leaned closer. That's not a single surface. No, HFY said. It isn't. What is it, then? He didn't answer immediately, because now the pieces were aligning. Mass, structure, position, deliberate gravitational control, absence of emission, absence of signal, and the size. He looked at the estimate again, then at the visual, then at the empty space, where stars should have been. How large is it? He asked. Lyra pulled up the dimensional approximation. The system hesitated again, then displayed a range. She stared at it, her breath caught. Commander. He didn't need her to say it. He was already reading it, already translating it into something his mind could grasp. Kilometers, not meters, not hundreds, thousands. That's not possible, she said. No, HFY agreed quietly. It's too big. Yes. She looked back at him, something like fear beginning to show in her expression. Nothing that size should be able to move. Nothing that size should exist this close without destabilizing the entire region. HFY didn't respond, because she was right. By every known model, by every established understanding of physics, engineering, and logistics, something that large with that much mass should not be sitting quietly at the edge of a monitored boundary without triggering alarms across half the sector. And yet, it was. Check energy output, he said. Lyra nodded, pulling up the readings. The numbers appeared, then stabilized. Then, HFY felt the cold clarity sharpen. Compare it, he said. To what? Archive data, he said. Anything with a similar profile. I don't care how old it is. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then began searching. The system scanned through decades of recorded signatures. Most returned no match. Then, one. Lyra froze. HFY saw it on her screen. A comparison overlay. Old data. Very old. From the original survey logs. He stepped closer. Expand it. She did. Two signatures appeared side by side. One faint, primitive, barely detectable. The other, vast, overwhelming, but identical in shape. The same pattern, the same underlying structure, scaled, massively. HFY stared at it. His mind didn't reject it this time. It accepted it instantly, because there was no other explanation. That's, Lyra whispered. Yes. It can't be. It is. She shook her head slowly. That's from the survey archive. That's from their early propulsion systems. That's human, HFY said. The words settled into the silence like a weight. Lyra looked back at the comparison. At that scale, she said, that's not an improvement. That's not an advancement. That's a multiplication, HFY finished. He looked at the output differential. The system had already calculated it. He read the number. Then read it again. 412 times. Lyra's voice dropped to almost nothing. They didn't change the technology. No, HFY said. They just made it bigger. Yes. He looked back at the shape, at the massive absence in the starfield, at the thing that should not exist. And now, for the first time, he understood what he was looking at. Not completely, not fully, but enough. Enough to know that this wasn't an anomaly. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was deliberate, constructed, engineered, and it had appeared at the exact edge of their monitored space. Without warning, without signal, without explanation. Lyra swallowed. Commander, if that's human. HFY didn't take his eyes off the screen. Yes. Then what is it doing here? The question lingered, heavy, unanswered. HFY watched the silent shape in the dark, the thing that had taken primitive technology and scaled it into something that could block out stars. It's not passing through, he said quietly. It's not drifting. It's not lost. Lyra looked at him. Then what is it doing? HFY's voice was calm. Too calm. It's waiting. The words settled into the bridge like a pressure change. Waiting. Not drifting. Not arriving. Not lost. Waiting. HFY did not repeat it. He didn't need to, because once the idea formed, everything else began to align around it. Run identity cross-reference, he said. Lyra didn't argue this time. Her hands moved immediately, pulling deeper from the archive, beyond the surface-level survey logs, into the raw data files that had been stored and forgotten for decades. The system searched, compared, matched. The results began to populate slowly. Old signals, early transmissions, fragments of data that had once been classified as irrelevant background noise. HFY watched as the patterns appeared, and once again, they matched. Commander, Lyra said, her voice tight now. I see it. She brought up another layer of comparison. Communication frequencies, energy modulation patterns, even the irregular fluctuations that had once been dismissed as inefficient or unstable. All of it aligned, primitive, unrefined, but unmistakable. Human. They haven't changed the fundamentals, she said. No, HFY replied. They've refined them. And scaled them. Yes. Lyra leaned back slightly, as if putting distance between herself and the screen might make it easier to process. That's not how most species develop, she said. No. They discover something new, something more efficient. They replace what doesn't work. Yes. But this, she gestured toward the data. They kept it, improved it, built on it. HFY nodded slowly. They didn't abandon their early technology, he said. They committed to it and turned it into this. The word hung there. This. Neither of them had a better word for it, because what they were looking at wasn't just a ship. It wasn't just a machine. It was the result of 80 years of uninterrupted focus. 80 years of taking something small and making it bigger, stronger, more resilient, more deliberate. Lyra's eyes flicked back to the mass reading. To build something like that, she said, they would have needed infrastructure, resources, coordination on a planetary scale. Yes, they would have needed to solve problems we didn't even think they were close to solving. Yes. She hesitated. Why? That question, that was the one HFY couldn't answer immediately. Not with data, not with numbers, because the data told them what humans had done. It did not tell them why. He looked back at the display, at the silent shape, holding its position at the boundary, at the absence of stars, at the complete lack of communication. They knew we were here, he said. Lyra frowned slightly. From the survey? Yes. They knew we observed them. Yes. And then we left. HFY nodded. And we never came back, she said slowly. No. Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Not empty, not routine. It felt heavy, like something had just shifted into place. They didn't know why. Lyra said. Havek didn't respond, because that felt closer to the truth than anything else they had said so far. They didn't know who we were, she continued. What we wanted. If we were coming back. No, Havek said quietly. They just knew. She paused, choosing her words carefully, that something out there was more advanced than them. Yes, and that it had found them. Havek's gaze remained fixed on the object, and left. Lyra swallowed, so they prepared. The simplicity of that statement was what made it unsettling. Not panic, not chaos. Preparation, structured, deliberate, sustained over decades. They built this, she said, her voice barely steady now because of us. Havek felt that land harder than anything else so far, not because it was unexpected, but because it fit too well. The scale, the redundancy, the over-engineering, none of it made sense if you assumed normal development. All of it made sense if you assumed fear, not immediate fear, not reactive, the kind of fear that sits quietly in the background, that doesn't go away, that doesn't fade, that turns into planning, into strategy, into action. They weren't trying to reach us, Havek said slowly. Lyra looked at him. They were preparing for us. The bridge felt smaller suddenly, quieter, the hum of the station louder in the silence between them. Lyra shook her head slightly. That doesn't make sense, she said. If they were preparing for us, why aren't they doing anything? Havek didn't answer right away, because that question, that was the one that mattered now. He looked at the object again, at its stillness, at its silence, at the way it held position exactly at the boundary line, not crossing, not advancing, not retreating, just there. They're not acting, he said. Exactly. They're not transmitting. No. They're not scanning aggressively. No. Lyra's voice tightened. Then what are they doing? Havek finally looked away from the display, just for a moment, just long enough to consider the question properly. Then he looked back. They're showing us. Lyra blinked. Showing us what? He didn't hesitate this time. What they've become. The words settled heavily, not as a threat, not as a declaration, just a fact. Lyra stared at the screen again, at the impossible scale, at the controlled power, at the quiet, deliberate presence sitting at the edge of their space. They could have hidden this, she said. Yes. They could have stayed inside their system. Yes. They could have waited longer. Havek nodded, but they didn't. No. Another pause. Then softer. They came to the boundary. Yes. And stopped. Yes. Lyra's voice dropped. Why? Havek's answer was immediate. Because they wanted to be seen. Not as a question. Not as a theory. As a conclusion. The object did not move. It did not signal. It did not explain itself. It didn't need to. Everything about it, its size, its design, its presence, was already saying everything that needed to be said. Lyra exhaled slowly. That's not a warning, she said. No. It's not an attack. No. She looked at him. Then what is it? Havek's expression didn't change, but something in his voice did. It's an answer. To what? He turned his gaze back to the stars, to the space where the object erased them completely. To a question, he said quietly. We never realized we asked. Havek moved first, not because he had a plan, but because doing nothing was no longer an option. Transmit anomaly report, he said. Full priority. Attach all sensor data, raw and processed. Lyra was already working, compiling now. Send it to Sector Command and flag for immediate review. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Immediate? Yes. That word carried weight. It meant bypassing routine cues. It meant pulling attention from more important regions. It meant saying, this matters. Lyra finished the transmission and sent it. The confirmation ping echoed softly across the bridge. And then, nothing. The object did not react. It did not shift. It did not acknowledge. It remained exactly as it had been since it appeared. Watching, waiting, HFY returned to his command chair, but he didn't sit the same way he had before. There was no leaning back now, no passive observation. His posture was forward, engaged, every part of his attention locked on the display. "Expand sensor range," he said. "I want everything around it. Space, debris, radiation, anything." "Already running," Lyra replied. Data began to fill the screens, layer after layer. Nothing. No escort vessels. No hidden fleet. No supporting structures. Just the object. Alone. "That doesn't make sense," Lyra said. HFY didn't respond immediately, because she was right. Something that size, something built with that level of intention, should not be alone. "Check for cloaked signatures," he said. Scanning. Another sweep. Another set of results. Nothing. "No secondary contacts," she said. "It's just it." HFY studied the data, then the visual, then the boundary line. "They didn't bring support," he said. Lyra frowned. "Why wouldn't they?" He didn't answer, because that question didn't have a comfortable answer. A civilization that built something like this did not make careless decisions. If it was alone, it was meant to be alone. "Commander," Lyra said quietly. "Yes. If they wanted to threaten us, wouldn't they bring more?" "Yes. If they wanted to hide, they wouldn't be here at all." "Yes. Then why come at all?" HFY's eyes remained on the object. "That's what we're going to find out." A soft tone sounded from the communications panel. Incoming acknowledgement. Sector Command had received the report. HFY glanced at the notification. No immediate response. Of course not. It would take time. Reports had to be reviewed. Data verified. Decisions made. That was how the Dominion worked. Slow. Measured. Controlled. HFY looked back at the screen. At the thing that had appeared in less than 40 minutes. And changed everything. "They won't understand this right away," he said. Lyra didn't take her eyes off her station. "Do we?" "No." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of questions. "Run continuous scan cycle," HFY said. "I want updates every 5 minutes." "That's going to overload the system." "Then prioritize. Drop non-essential monitoring. Focus on that object." "Yes, Commander." The station shifted its operations. Energy redirected. Processing power reallocated. Everything now centered on one point in space. The boundary. The object. The unknown. Minutes passed. Then more. Each scan returned the same result. No movement. No signal. No change. It was like watching something that had already made its decision and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Lyra broke the silence again. "Commander, what if it stays like this?" HFY didn't look away. "Then we keep watching." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." She hesitated. "Until what?" HFY's voice was steady. "Until it does something." As if the universe had been waiting for that exact moment. The sensors flickered, just for an instant. A small spike, barely above background noise. Lyra's head snapped toward her display. "Contact." She stopped, because it wasn't a contact. It wasn't movement. It wasn't a weapon. It was a signal. Weak. Precise. Directed. HFY stood again instantly. "Source." Lyra didn't need to check. "You already know." He did. Of course he did. "Put it on screen." The display shifted. The signal resolved into structured data. Not random. Not corrupted. Organized. Intentional. HFY felt the tension in the room sharpen. Because this was the first action. After all the silence. After all the waiting. After all the questions. "They're transmitting," Lyra said. "Yes." "Commander." Her voice carried something now. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Something closer to realization. HFY watched the data stabilize. Watched it translate. Watched meaning begin to form from raw signal. They waited. he said quietly. Lyra nodded slowly. For us. The translation completed. The message appeared. Short, simple, clear. Havok read it once, then again, and as he did, something shifted, not in the situation, not in the object, in him, because the message was not what he had expected, not a warning, not a demand, not a threat. He looked at Lyra. She had read it too. Neither of them spoke for a moment, because they both understood, at the exact same time, what this meant. The object at the boundary had not come to attack. It had not come to hide. It had not come by accident. It had come to speak, and it had waited until someone was finally ready to listen. The message did not repeat. It did not escalate. It did not change. It remained on the screen, stable, clear, almost patient. Havok read it again, not because he hadn't understood it the first time, but because his mind was trying to align the simplicity of the words with the scale of what stood behind them. It didn't fit. Not easily. Open channel, he said. Lyra hesitated. Commander, we don't have authorization yet. I'm not responding, he said. I'm observing. That distinction mattered. The channel opened in passive mode. No outgoing signal. No acknowledgement. Just listening. The object did not react. Of course it didn't. It already knew they were there. That part was becoming increasingly clear. Full system analysis, Havok said. Everything we can see, structure, output, patterning. I want to understand what we're looking at before command tells us what to think. Lyra nodded quickly. The station shifted again, diverting even more processing power toward the object. The data began to resolve in layers, and with each layer, the situation became less comfortable. Structural analysis first, Havok said. The visual feed enhanced. Edges sharpened. Surface definition increased. What had once looked like a single massive shape wasn't. Lyra leaned forward slowly. That's layered. Yes. The system began mapping density variations across the hull. Sections appeared. Distinct. Separate. Not decorative. Functional. How many layers? Havok asked. Working on it. The scan deepened. Signals bounced. Returned. Translated. Lyra's hands slowed. Commander, how many? She didn't answer immediately, because she didn't want to say it wrong. At least 9. Havok didn't react outwardly, but inside, that number mattered. A lot. Confirm. I'm trying. The system recalculated. Adjusted. Verified. The number held. 9. Outer layers? Havok asked. Less dense, Lyra said. Structured for impact absorption. And inner layers? Denser. Reinforced. Likely protecting critical systems. Havok's mind processed that instantly. They expect damage, he said. Lyra nodded slowly. They designed it to be hit. Not to avoid damage. Not to minimize it. To survive it. That was different. Very different. Move to propulsion, Havok said. The scan shifted. Energy signatures resolved across the structure. Multiple sources. Separated. Independent. Lyra frowned. That's not standard. How many? She counted. Stopped. Counted again. 8. Havok looked at her. 8 drive systems? Yes. That's not redundancy, he said quietly. No. Redundancy was 1 backup. Maybe 2. 8 was something else entirely. Different signatures. Lyra added. Havok's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. They're not variations of the same system, she said. They're completely different. He turned fully toward her now. Different how? Different physics, she said. That word. That changed things. They didn't just build multiple engines, she continued. They built multiple ways to move. Havok felt the implications settle in. If one system fails, the others still work. If one system is countered, the others still work. He turned back to the display. They didn't build for efficiency, he said. No, they built for certainty. Lyra didn't respond, because that was exactly what it looked like. Continue, HFY said. The scan moved deeper. Internal structure. Life signatures. The system hesitated, then returned a number. Lyra stared at it. No, she said under her breath. HFY didn't need to ask. How many? She swallowed. Just under 6,000. The number hung in the air. Heavy. Uncomfortable. That's not possible, she said. A vessel that size should operate with, what, 300 crew? Approximately. This is 20 times that. HFY processed it. Then, understood it. They're not optimizing for efficiency, he said again. They're not optimizing for survival either, Lyra added. HFY shook his head slightly. No, he said. They are. She looked at him. That many people is inefficient. Yes. It increases risk. Yes. It complicates operations. Yes. Then why? Because they expect losses. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. Lyra's expression shifted. They built this, she said slowly, expecting people to die. HFY didn't soften it. Yes. Silence. The hum of the station seemed louder now, more present, because everything else had changed. They built for scenarios where parts of the ship are destroyed, he continued, where systems fail, where sections are lost. And they made sure, Lyra said, that the rest keeps functioning. Yes. She looked back at the display, at the massive structure, at the layers, at the engines, at the impossible scale. This isn't over-engineering, she said. HFY nodded once. No. It's intention. He let that sit for a moment. Then, weapon systems. Lyra hesitated again. Commander. Do it. The scan shifted. Surface mapping refined. Hidden sections revealed. Recessed structures along the hull. Uniform spacing. Consistent pattern. Lyra stared. Those are weapon ports. HFY said nothing, because that much was obvious. What's the count? He asked. She started. Stopped. Started again. I'm losing track. Estimate. She looked at the data. Then away. Then back. Too many. That was not a number, but it was an answer. And it was enough. HFY exhaled slowly. They didn't specialize, he said. No. They diversified. Lyra nodded. Different sizes, she said. Different configurations. Different energy profiles. Different purposes. Yes. He watched the data scroll. Watched the system try to categorize it. Fail. Retry. Fail again. They built for scenarios they haven't encountered yet, he said. Lyra looked at him. That's not strategy. HFY shook his head slightly. No. That's anticipation. The words settled between them, because that was what all of this was. Not reaction. Not escalation. Preparation. Layered. Redundant. Deliberate. Every system, every choice, every detail pointed to the same conclusion. They hadn't built this for a specific threat. They had built it for all of them. Lyra leaned back slowly, her voice quieter now. This isn't a warship. HFY didn't correct her immediately, because she was close. Very close. Then, it's not just a warship, he said. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the display. On the thing that had erased the stars behind it. On the structure that had taken 80 years to become real. It's a statement. The object did not move. It did not signal again. It did not need to. Everything about it, from the outermost layer to the deepest system, was already speaking. And for the first time since it appeared, HFY understood what it was saying. Not in words, not in signals, but in design. In intention, in scale. It wasn't telling them what humans could do. It was showing them what humans had prepared for. HFY did not issue another order. For the first time since the anomaly appeared, he stopped trying to analyze what he was seeing, because analysis had taken him as far as it could. Mass, structure, systems, all of it answered one question. What is this? But it did not answer the one that mattered. Why? He stood in silence, watching the object, no, the vessel, hold its position at the boundary, its presence unchanged, its intentions still unspoken beyond that single message. Lyra broke the silence. "Commander, this doesn't make sense." He didn't look at her. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't. They built all of this." She gestured toward the display. "For what? There's no fleet, no attack pattern, no territorial movement. No, they're not even crossing the boundary. No." Her voice tightened slightly. "Then why are they here?" Havoc finally exhaled, because now he understood what had been wrong with their thinking from the beginning. "We've been asking the wrong question," he said. Lyra frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned slightly, not away from the screen, but away from the way he had been looking at it. "We've been asking what they're going to do," he said. And that assumes they came here to do something." She blinked. "They didn't." Havoc shook his head slowly. "No." He looked back at the vessel, at its stillness, at the deliberate restraint in its position. "They came here," he said, "to show something." Lyra stared at him. "What?" Havoc didn't answer immediately, because the answer was already in front of them. They had just been interpreting it incorrectly. "They didn't build this for us," he said. Lyra frowned. "But you said." "They built it because of us," he corrected. That distinction, that was everything. She hesitated. "That's the same thing." "No," Havoc said quietly. "It isn't." He stepped closer to the display again. "To build something like this," he continued, "you need time, coordination, resources, and a very clear objective." "Yes, and that objective has to justify everything." She nodded slowly. "So what justifies this?" Havoc's eyes remained fixed on the vessel. "Not conquest. No, not expansion. No, not even dominance." Lyra's voice dropped. "Then what?" Havoc paused, and when he spoke, it was not a guess anymore. "They built this," he said, "because they were afraid." The words settled heavily. Lyra didn't reject them, but she didn't accept them easily either. "Afraid of what?" she asked. Havoc didn't look away from the screen. "Us." Silence. Lyra shook her head slightly. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "If they were afraid, why come here? Why show themselves?" "Because fear doesn't always mean hiding," Havoc replied. She looked at him. "Then what does it mean?" He gestured toward the vessel. "This." She followed his gaze. "At the layers, the drives, the crew, the weapons, all of it. They didn't build this to attack us," Havoc said. "They built it so we couldn't ignore them." Lyra's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "They didn't want to be weak," she said slowly. "No, they didn't want to be vulnerable. No, they didn't want—" She paused, searching for the right word. Havoc said it for her. "Managed." That word landed differently, because it wasn't about destruction. It was about control, about being the kind of civilization that things happen to, without permission, without input, without resistance. "They saw us once," Havoc continued. "We came into their system. We observed them. We categorized them. And left," Lyra said. "Yes. And we never explained why." "No." She stared at the screen again. "They didn't know what we wanted." "No. They didn't know if we would come back." "No. They didn't know if we were peaceful." "No." Havoc nodded once. "So they assumed the worst." Lyra exhaled slowly and prepared for it. "Yes. Not panic. Not chaos. Preparation. Structured. Measured. Relentless. They didn't build a weapon," she said quietly. Havoc shook his head. "No. They built insurance." He didn't correct her, because that was close. Very close. "They built certainty," he said, "that no matter what happened next, they would survive," she finished. "Yes." Lyra looked back at the vessel, at the impossible scale of it, at the quiet, controlled presence sitting exactly at the edge of Dominion space. "They're not threatening us," she said. "No, they're not warning us. No. She swallowed. They're showing us what happens if we do. Havek didn't respond, because that was the part that didn't need to be said out loud. The message wasn't aggressive. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't even defensive in the traditional sense. It was conditional. We are ready, not for war, for whatever comes. Lyra's voice softened. Commander. Yes. What do we do? Havek looked at the vessel one more time, then at the boundary line, then at the message still sitting on the screen. Simple, polite, patient. They asked for a conversation, he said. Yes. And they waited. Yes. He turned slightly toward her. And they didn't move until we were ready. Lyra nodded slowly, understanding settling in. They're not forcing anything, she said. No. They're giving us a choice. Yes. Havek looked back at the display, at the silent presence that had taken 80 years to build and 6 hours to wait. For a reply. They spent 80 years preparing for the worst, he said quietly, and they're still hoping for something better. Lyra didn't speak. She didn't need to, because for the first time since the object appeared, the situation was clear. Not simple, not safe, but clear. This wasn't the beginning of a war. It was the end of an assumption. That humanity was small. That humanity was irrelevant. That humanity could be ignored. Havek exhaled slowly. They didn't come here to fight, he said. Lyra's eyes stayed on the screen. No. They came here, he continued, to make sure we understood exactly what that would mean. And the vessel, silent, unmoving, patient, remained exactly where it was, waiting, not for permission, not for orders, but for something much simpler, an answer. The response from Sector Command did not arrive immediately. That, in itself, was expected. What wasn't expected was how long the silence lasted. Hours passed. Not empty hours, but heavy ones. Every 5 minutes, the station completed another full scan cycle. Every 5 minutes, the results came back the same. No movement, no escalation, no change. The vessel remained exactly where it had chosen to be, waiting. Havek stood near the central display, arms folded behind his back, eyes fixed on the boundary line. He hadn't left the bridge. Neither had Lyra. There was no point. Nothing else mattered now. Commander, Lyra said quietly, breaking the long stretch of silence. Still no reply. Havek nodded once. They're reviewing. It's been 3 hours. Yes. That's not normal. No. She looked back at her console. They should have at least acknowledged priority status. They did. I mean a directive. Havek didn't respond, because he understood what she wasn't saying. Delay meant uncertainty. Uncertainty at the command level was rare, very rare. They don't know what to do, Lyra said softly. Havek didn't correct her, because that was becoming increasingly likely. A soft chime interrupted the silence. Both of them turned instantly. Incoming transmission. Priority channel. Havek stepped forward. On screen, the display shifted. A Dominion command interface appeared, clean, structured, authoritative. Admiral Saran, senior command authority for the sector. Her expression was controlled, but there was something beneath it. Something Havek recognized immediately. Concern. Commander Havek, she said. We've reviewed your report. Yes, Admiral. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the data feed, still running in the corner of the display. You are confirming all readings are accurate? Yes. No sensor error. No interference. None detected. A brief pause. That was all it took. Just a moment too long. Admiral Saran exhaled slightly. Understood. Havek waited. He didn't interrupt. Didn't offer additional explanation. Because whatever command was going to say next would define everything that followed. We have escalated this to High Council review, she said. Havek felt that more than he showed. High Council. That meant this wasn't just a sector issue anymore. This was galactic. What are your orders, Admiral? He asked. Another pause. Short, measured, But there. Maintain position, she said. Continue observation. Do not engage. Do not respond to the transmission. Lyra's head turned slightly at that. Havok didn't react outwardly. Yes, Admiral. We are dispatching a fleet, Saran continued. Estimated arrival, 8 hours. Havok's eyes flicked briefly toward the vessel, then back to the Admiral. Understood. Commander! Her voice lowered slightly, just enough to lose the formal edge. Yes. What is your assessment? That question, that was not protocol. That was not standard command procedure. That was personal. Havok answered without hesitation. It's not a threat, he said. Lyra glanced at him. The Admiral's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Explain. It has not advanced, Havok said. It has not demonstrated aggression. It transmitted once, and then remained silent. That does not mean it is harmless. No, Havok agreed, but it also does not behave like an attack force. Saran studied him. And what does it behave like? Havok didn't look away. A message. Silence. Not long, but enough. Commander, Saran said carefully, that object has enough mass and energy output to destabilize this entire region. Yes, it is positioned at our boundary. Yes, and you believe it is not a threat. Havok chose his words precisely. I believe it is not here to initiate conflict. The distinction mattered. Saran saw that. Her gaze shifted briefly, just for a fraction of a second, to the data feed. Then back. Continue observation, she said. Do not deviate from orders. Yes, Admiral. The transmission ended. The screen returned to the live feed. The vessel, the silence, the waiting. Lyra exhaled slowly. They're sending a fleet. Yes. That's not a conversation. No. That's preparation. Yes. She turned toward him. They're expecting this to escalate. Havok didn't respond immediately, because the Dominion, always prepared for escalation. It was their nature. Control, containment, dominance if necessary. He looked back at the vessel, at the thing that had come alone, the thing that had waited, at the thing that had spoken once, and then chosen silence. They're reacting the way we always do, Lyra said. Havok nodded slowly. They're preparing for the worst. And what if that's not what this is? Havok didn't answer, because that question, that was the problem. Across the Dominion, responses were already forming, simulations running, outcomes predicted, threat levels recalculated. A new classification would be assigned. Humanity, no longer negligible, no longer distant, no longer irrelevant. Something else, something that required attention, something that required control. Commander, Lyra said quietly. Yes, if the fleet arrives. He knew what she was going to ask. He didn't let her finish. They will interpret this as a show of force and respond accordingly. Yes. Lyra looked back at the display, at the vessel that had not moved an inch. They didn't bring a fleet, she said. No. They didn't escalate. No. They just came here. Yes. She swallowed. And we're about to answer that with warships. Havok didn't say anything, because that was exactly what it looked like. The Dominion saw a potential threat, so it prepared to neutralize it. Humans had seen a potential threat and spent 80 years preparing for it. The difference was becoming very clear. Lyra's voice softened. They're going to misunderstand each other. Havok's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Yes, and once that happens, he finished the thought, it becomes much harder to stop. The vessel remained still, unchanging, patient, as if it already knew, as if it had accounted for this, as if this was part of the preparation. Havok exhaled slowly. 8 hours, he said. Lyra nodded. That's how long we have. For what? Havok didn't look away from the boundary. For this to remain a conversation. Because once the fleet arrived, it wouldn't be just one presence anymore. It would be many. and many, changed things, even when no one intended them to. The hours did not pass quickly. They stretched, each minute heavier than the last, each scan identical to the one before it. No movement, no new signals, no change. The vessel remained exactly where it had been since it first appeared. Still, silent, waiting. HFY had stopped checking the time. There was no point. Time, in this moment, was not something he could control, only what he did with it. "Commander," Lyra said quietly. He didn't turn. "They're coming into range." He already knew. The sensors had picked them up minutes ago. Multiple signatures. Large. Organized. Dominion fleet. They had arrived early. Of course they had. Preparation on their side meant speed, control, presence. HFY watched as the tactical overlay appeared. 3 capital ships. 6 escorts. Formation tight. Weapons cold. For now. "They're not slowing," Lyra said. "No. They're moving directly toward the boundary." "Yes." She hesitated. "They're not adjusting for the vessel." HFY's jaw tightened slightly. "They're following protocol." Which meant approach, establish control, demand identification, escalate if necessary. It was a system that had worked for centuries, against threats that behaved predictably, against civilizations that responded in expected ways. HFY looked at the other side of the display, at the human vessel, still unmoving, still silent, still waiting. "They don't understand," Lyra said. HFY didn't answer, because that was obvious. The fleet saw a threat, a massive, unknown object at their border, and they were responding the only way they knew how. Presence, power, control. The distance closed. Fast. Too fast. "Commander!" Lyra's voice dropped. "They're powering forward arrays." HFY turned slightly. "Confirm." Confirmed. A warning posture. Not an attack, but close enough. A statement. "We are here. We are ready. We are in control." HFY looked back at the human vessel. It did not respond. Not to the approach. Not to the power shift. Not to anything. It remained exactly the same. And somehow, that was worse. "They're going to push this," Lyra said. "Yes. And if the humans react..." HFY spoke before she could finish. "They won't." She looked at him. "How can you be sure?" HFY didn't hesitate. "Because they've had 80 years to decide how they would respond." Silence. The fleet moved closer, closer, closing the distance to the boundary, to the line that, until today, had never mattered. "Commander," Lyra said, her voice tight now. "They're preparing a transmission." HFY exhaled slowly. "Of course they are." A formal demand would follow. Identification, intent, compliance. It was how the Dominions spoke to the unknown. Firm, controlled, unyielding. The transmission signal began to form. Directed, focused. And then, the sensors flickered. Just once. Lyra's head snapped toward her console. "Signal." HFY already knew. "Source." "You know the answer." Yes, he did. The human vessel, the massive structure that had said nothing for hours, moved first, not physically, not in position, but in action. A second transmission, clear, stronger than before, not directed at the station this time, directed at the fleet. HFY felt something tighten in his chest. "Put it on screen." The message appeared. Simple, structured, translated instantly. HFY read it, and for the first time, he understood everything. Not just the vessel, not just the preparation, not just the silence. Everything. Lyra read it too. Her breath caught slightly. "Commander." He didn't respond, because the message didn't need interpretation. It didn't need analysis. It didn't need context. It was already complete. The fleet held position, just for a moment, long enough for command to process it, long enough for hesitation to form. HFY watched the tactical overlay, watched the formation slow, watched the forward arrays remain powered, but not advance. A choice. A very small one, but enough. Lyra's voice was barely above a whisper. They stopped. Yes. The human vessel did not move. It did not power weapons. It did not escalate. It remained, exactly as it had always been, waiting, not for surrender, not for fear, for understanding. HFY exhaled slowly. They didn't come here to win a war, he said. Lyra nodded. They came here to make sure there wouldn't be one. The words settled into the silence. Heavy, final. The fleet held position. The boundary remained unbroken. And for the first time since the anomaly appeared, nothing felt like it was about to collapse. Not because the situation was safe, not because the threat was gone, but because, for one brief moment, both sides had chosen not to misunderstand each other. HFY looked at the vessel one last time, at the impossible scale, at the quiet strength, at the 80 years of preparation that had led to this single moment. They weren't building a weapon, he said quietly. Lyra glanced at him. No, they were building a voice. The vessel did not reply again. It didn't need to. It had already said everything. And this time, the galaxy had listened, not because it was forced to, not because it was afraid, but because, for the first time, it understood exactly what it was looking at. Not a threat, not an enemy, not something to control, something that had been waiting to be taken seriously. HFY allowed himself the smallest shift in posture, not relaxed, not comfortable, but steady, the kind of steady that comes when uncertainty turns into clarity. They spent 80 years preparing for the worst, he said. Lyra's voice was quiet, and still chose this. Yes. HFY looked out at the stars, at the boundary that no longer felt like a line, but a meeting point. They didn't come here to show us how strong they are, he said. Lyra nodded slowly. They came here, she replied, to show us what happens when we stop paying attention. The vessel remained. The fleet remained. The silence remained. But it was no longer empty. It was understood. And in that understanding, the war that could have started never did.